What if the greatest horrors in history were not committed on battlefields, but inside laboratories? Places meant for discovery became chambers of suffering. Doctors became executioners. And science lost its humanity. Throughout history, governments, scientists, and powerful institutions carried out experiments on innocent people. Prisoners, children, the poor, minorities, and even entire populations. Some victims never knew they were being tested on. Others were promised treatment, but were instead used as living experiments. Tonight, we uncover the terrifying truth behind some of the darkest human experiments ever conducted. Because history is not always written in glory. Sometimes, it is written in blood. The year was 1941. World War II had turned Europe into a nightmare. Across occupied territories, millions were arrested and sent to concentration camps. But inside camps like Auschwitz, something even darker was happening. Under the command of Nazi doctors, prisoners became test subjects for cruel scientific experiments. Men, women, and even children were forced into laboratories where pain had no limit. One of the most infamous figures was Dr. Josef Mengele, known today as the Angel of Death. Mengele was obsessed with genetics, especially twins. When twin children arrived at Auschwitz, they were separated from others and taken to his medical barracks. At first they were treated kindly. They received food, candy, special attention. But this kindness was only preparation for horror. The children were injected with deadly chemicals, exposed to diseases, and forced into surgeries without anesthesia. Some had chemicals injected into their eyes in attempts to change eye color. Others were sewn together in bizarre efforts to create artificial twins. If one twin died, the other was often killed immediately so their organs could be compared during autopsies. Thousands suffered unimaginable agony. Very few survived. But Mengele was not alone. Other Nazi doctors conducted freezing experiments where prisoners were submerged in ice water to study hypothermia. Victims screamed as their body temperatures slowly dropped until death. There were high-altitude experiments where people were locked in pressure chambers to simulate extreme aviation conditions. Many suffered brain damage, burst lungs, or died instantly. The Nazis justified all of this in the name of scientific advancement. But after the war ended, the world saw these experiments for what they truly were. Pure evil disguised as science. The horrors revealed during the Nuremberg trials shocked humanity. And from these atrocities came the Nuremberg Code, one of the first international ethical standards for human experimentation. It declared something simple but powerful. No human being should ever be experimented on without voluntary consent. But tragically, the world would ignore that lesson again. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service began a medical study in Alabama. The goal was to observe the effects of untreated syphilis. The participants were 600 African American men, most of them poor sharecroppers. They were told they would receive free health care. But that was a lie. The men were never properly informed about the experiment. In reality, doctors wanted to study how the disease destroyed the human body over time. Even worse. When penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in the 1940s, researchers deliberately refused to treat the patients. Doctors watched the disease spread through their bodies. Blindness, mental illness, heart failure, death. Some infected their wives. Some children were born with congenital syphilis. And still the study continued. For 40 years. 40 years of deception. 40 years of suffering. The truth finally emerged in 1972 after a whistleblower exposed the program to the media. Public outrage exploded across America. The government was forced to apologize decades later. But the damage was already done. The Tuskegee study became a symbol of medical racism and betrayal. And for many communities, it destroyed trust in healthcare systems for generations. While Nazi Germany conducted experiments in Europe, Imperial Japan was carrying out horrors of its own in occupied China. Hidden from the world was a secret military program known as Unit 731. Officially, it was called a research facility. In reality, it was a factory of death. Led by General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 performed biological and chemical experiments on living humans. Prisoners were referred to as logs. Not people. Logs. Men, women, pregnant women, and children were infected with deadly diseases including plague, cholera, and anthrax. Victims were dissected alive without anesthesia so researchers could observe the disease inside the body. Some prisoners had limbs amputated and reattached to opposite sides of their bodies. Others were frozen alive to study frostbite. Human beings were tied to poles and used to test flamethrowers, grenades, and biological weapons. Entire villages became testing grounds for plague bombs dropped from aircraft. Thousands died. Possibly hundreds of thousands. But perhaps the darkest part of this story came after the war. Many Unit 731 scientists escaped punishment. Why? Because their research was secretly valuable to world powers during the Cold War. In exchange for their data, some were granted immunity. Justice was sacrificed for scientific information. And for decades, the full truth remained hidden. In the 1950s, fear consumed America. The Cold War had begun. The CIA feared enemies might discover ways to control the human mind. So they launched one of the most disturbing secret projects in U.S. history. Its name was MKUltra. The program involved illegal experiments on unwitting citizens. The goal? Mind control. Researchers tested drugs, hypnosis, psychological torture, sensory deprivation, and electric shocks. One of the most infamous methods involved LSD. The CIA secretly gave psychedelic drugs to people without their consent. Some subjects were prisoners. Some were mental patients. Others were ordinary civilians who had no idea they were part of an experiment. In some cases, people suffered permanent psychological trauma. One scientist named Frank Olson allegedly died after being secretly dosed with LSD. His death remains surrounded by mystery and conspiracy. The CIA destroyed many MKUltra documents in the 1970s. But enough survived to expose the shocking truth. Government agencies had experimented on their own citizens in complete secrecy. Again, science and power crossed ethical boundaries. And ordinary people paid the price. In 1939, researchers at the University of Iowa conducted an experiment on orphan children. It would later become known as the Monster Study. The purpose was to study speech disorders. But the methods were cruel. Some children were constantly criticized for the way they spoke. Researchers insulted them, mocked them, and told them they would become stutterers. The psychological damage was devastating. Children who had spoken normally developed severe anxiety and speech problems. Some became withdrawn for the rest of their lives. The study proved something terrifying. Words themselves can become weapons. And vulnerable children can carry invisible scars forever. During the Cold War, governments raced to understand the effects of nuclear radiation. But some experiments crossed horrifying ethical lines. In several secret studies, hospital patients were injected with radioactive substances without informed consent. Pregnant women and children were unknowingly exposed to radiation. Military personnel were ordered to observe nuclear explosions from close distances. Some soldiers later developed cancers and lifelong illnesses. Citizens living near test sites were often never warned about the dangers. Entire communities became silent victims of nuclear experimentation. The age of atomic power had arrived. But humanity barely understood the consequences. And many paid with their health. The terrifying question is not just what happened, but why. How could educated scientists commit such cruelty? Part of the answer lies in power. When governments believe they are fighting for survival, ethics often disappear. Fear becomes justification. Another reason was dehumanization. Victims were labeled as inferior, dangerous, or expendable. Once people stop seeing others as human, cruelty becomes easier. And then there was ambition. Some researchers became obsessed with discovery at any cost. They convinced themselves the suffering of a few could benefit many. History has shown how dangerous that thinking can become. Because once morality is removed from science, humanity itself is at risk. The horrors of human experimentation changed international law forever. After World War II, ethical principles were established to protect human subjects. Medical research now requires informed consent. Patients must understand risks. Experiments must be reviewed by ethics boards. And participants have the right to refuse. At least in theory. But even today, ethical controversies continue. Technology grows faster every year. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, surveillance systems, neural implants. Humanity still faces the same dangerous question. Just because something can be done, should it be done? History warns us what happens when science loses compassion. The darkest chapters of history are not ancient myths. They are real events carried out by real people. Doctors, scientists, governments, institutions trusted by society. And perhaps that is what makes these stories truly terrifying. The monsters were not hiding in shadows. They wore uniforms, lab coats, and smiles. History is filled with incredible achievements. But it also carries scars humanity must never forget. Because remembering these horrors is the only way to prevent them from happening again. And somewhere in the silence of forgotten laboratories, the echoes of the victims still remain. If you enjoyed this dark history documentary, subscribe for more untold stories from history's darkest moments.